breaking news here as well. Looking at Fox News right now, live shots of Jerusalem where it's 5:04 in the afternoon. Air raid sirens are blasting across Jerusalem as we speak. And let's welcome on and say hello to our next guest, Gregg Roman, the director of the Middle East Forum, joining us on KCMO Talk Radio, former political advisor to the Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel, and he also worked for the Israeli Ministry of Defense. He joins us on KCMO. Gregg, thank you for being here. Let's just start with your reaction and what's been on your mind here the last 48 hours.
So I woke up on Saturday morning, very much like every American, thinking that they were going to have a nice weekend, the last weekend of summer, really. Unfortunately, I saw my brothers and sisters in Israel, hundreds of whom were running away from murderous Hamas terrorists who had breached the fences and the walls that had separated Gaza from Israel proper. The news, as it came out hour after hour, was something that I imagine my father had felt in the Yom Kippur War, 50 years to the day of the launching of this attack. Now we know that 260 young Israeli youth were murdered, raped, and kidnapped from an end-of-holiday party in the north of the border region with Gaza. We know that an additional 600 Israelis, so 860 individuals at least at this time, were maimed, were mowed down in the street, were blown up by rocket-propelled grenades, were ran over by Hamas trucks, and were also kidnapped. Now we have 130 individuals who are in captivity, kidnapped by Hamas in Gaza. But the most important point I think that your listeners should know about is that this is not binary between just Israelis and Palestinians. The State Department announced half an hour ago that 9 Americans were killed in this attack and that there are Americans alive currently being held captive by a terror organization in Gaza.
So, Gregg, you bring up a great point. It's not binary. I mean, what do you want to see? What do you think the United States should be doing today and this administration in particular after what was unfortunately a very quiet weekend from them on many fronts?
Well, it's not so much what I like to see them do in the short term, because I think they're making the right moves. They've pledged defense assistance. They've moved an aircraft carrier group close to Israeli territorial waters to act as a deterrent from Hezbollah in Israel's north or Iran from getting involved in this. But there are some policy changes that the United States can make in the long term that I think will help, perhaps not prevent, but to minimize the dangers that both the U.S. and Israel face from non-state terror organizations. The first is all U.S. assistance to Gaza should end immediately. The European Union suspended all of their aid to the Palestinians this morning. The U.S. should follow suit. Secondly, there must be consequences for both terror actors and the architects of terror. That means that the United States needs to knock on the doors of Istanbul and Turkey and in Doha and Qatar, and they need to address the leaders of those organizations who host Hamas offices. In fact, the order to execute this attack came from the capital of what the U.S. considers to be a non-NATO major ally of the United States, the Emir of Qatar. And we have to say, you choose Israel or you choose to be with Hamas. And lastly, I think that it's important for us to not just interdict Hamas weaponry, which may be going to resupply the Gaza Strip, but also to make it U.S. policy to do everything with all the amount of power that we have to try and extricate those Americans who are being held by Hamas in Gaza. Israel has never asked the United States to fight its wars for her, but now this is a direct attack against American citizens, and that equation should be revisited.
Gregg Roman, Director, Middle East Forum, joining us on KCMO, former political advisor to the Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel. He also worked for the Israeli Ministry of Defense. He is joining us on KCMO in Kansas City. What about this $6 billion in unfrozen assets that Iran, of course, didn't yet receive, but was granted over the last few weeks by this administration? Where do you factor that in and Iranians' larger role into what has been obviously a tragic weekend in Israel?
Let's address this on sanctions, money, and then Iran's role. First on sanctions. The U.S. effectively undermines its sanctions regime when it realizes that all money is fungible. $6 billion, which goes to pay for humanitarian aid to Iran, offsets the Iranian government budget to be able to spend $6 billion more on terrorism. So even though they may be using this for the purchase of foodstuffs, every dollar they spend on supplying the people of Iran is another dollar they have free to supply Hamas. So the deal should have never been made. On hostages, Biden basically put the price of an American hostage being held by Iran or Iran state actors at $1 billion. Because if you take the equation, $6 billion released for 6 captives, that means that is Hamas going to expect $130 billion now in penance? I think it goes beyond that. Hamas will demand that every Palestinian terrorist currently sitting in an Israeli jail be released. And I think that we're going to see more deaths on that front. But if anything, Biden incentivized Hamas's hostage taking. And lastly, what I believe is the wider issue of Iran is that they have no intention on stopping their malign activities in the Middle East against Israel or against any ally of America. This was an effort to torpedo a peace deal between Israel and the most populous Sunni Muslim nation, or the most influential Sunni Muslim nation in the region, Saudi Arabia. And this was Hamas's answer to peace talks. So if Iran wants a war process, it should get it. But it should be on American and Israeli terms, not dictated by the calendar that's convenient for Tehran.
Gregg, we've seen some of the reaction from some of the members of the so-called squad in Congress. One, unfortunately, is here in Missouri, which embarrasses all of us. But Cori Bush putting out a statement over the weekend saying, I strongly condemn the targeting of civilians, and I urge an immediate ceasefire and de-escalation to prevent further loss of life. She goes on to say in the statement, our immediate focus must be on saving lives. I mean, mourning the death of Palestinian terrorists and equating that to the brutalities of what we saw committed against Jewish civilians is something I never thought I would see, even from members like this. What does it say about this ilk representing Americans in Congress?
I want to put this massacre in perspective for a second. I think that recounts. This is the single day of Jewish deaths since the Holocaust. This is 9/11 on a scale times 6 plus 130 captives in Hamas hands. That would be akin to the Congress member saying that we should negotiate with Al-Qaeda after they took place in the terror attacks on 9/11. I cannot imagine that any serving member of the House of Representatives nor the Senate who has sworn to uphold the oath of the U.S. Constitution would be in a position to make a statement like this and be reelected. If anything, they should hold their heads down and discuss and resign and allow responsible Americans to take their place. Because like I said beforehand, this is not just about the deaths of Israelis. 9 Americans have been killed. So are they saying we need to surrender to terrorism? That Americans should just be held in captive in perpetuity in Gaza by Islamists who seek not just the death of Israelis, but also the death of Americans? If anything, now is the time to stand up. And I am disgusted when I hear statements like that coming from either members of Congress or any other American that doesn't realize the severity of the situation that both our country and Israel is in today, 48 hours after the attacks took place.
And last thing, I don't think this is a large percentage of people, Gregg, but the risk here to Americans, I mean, we know what our border policies have been here in the U.S. over the last couple of years. We have no idea how many sleeper cells might be in the United States right now, but, no one understands protecting their land like Israel. What would your message be to Americans who still feel like, well, this doesn't really impact me?
I think that there's a great study that was done by one of our fellows at the Middle East Forum that you can find at meforum.org on terrorism and immigration. There's currently 43 cases of terrorists who were able to violate the U.S. immigration system that came into the United States, were then picked up by the FBI, but only after they were released by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So if anything, what happened on the Israeli-Gaza border is a clarion for support and to further amplify the efforts to strengthen our borders.
Mm-hmm. Well, keep up the great work, Gregg. Thank you so much for being here. Gregg Roman, Director, Middle East Forum. Find out more, meforum.org. We appreciate the time, Gregg. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much.
All right. Powerful conversation there with Gregg. And the website is great. And, of course, he's got incredible knowledge on this stuff as well as a former political advisor to the Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel. And he also worked for the Israeli Ministry of Defense.